precious promises, so that through them you may be partakers of the divine nature. Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. It's no secret that God is at work. We see evidence of it everywhere. We see it in the smiles of the children in a workshop when they learn something new about themselves. We see it in the smiles of the families when we show up at their door to fix their roof so that it doesn't rain inside the house anymore. And we feel it in the joy in our hearts when it bubbles over when we get to serve other people. To me, it's often the first thing I think about when I reflect over the word provision. I think about all of the good things that he has done in my life. I grew up with a loving family, I've always had plenty of food, and I get to sleep in a comfy bed at night. How often, though, do we take time to recognize God's provision through the trials in our lives? The stuff that's not so fun. This is a much harder question to answer, especially when we are in the midst of a storm. I believe, though, that most of God's greatest provisions are revealed by some of the hardest times that we face in life. Because it's one thing to believe and repeat the treasured psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But it's an entirely different thing to be able, or to be unable to walk one more step on your own. To have to lean on that staff and be held up. It's messy, uncomfortable, and absolutely painful. But have you ever considered that these are some of the most intimate moments that we share with God? Just something to think about. When Paul was sitting in prison for spreading the gospel, he chose to write. He wrote to the church and actually gave God glory in the midst of a prison cell. He told the church of the promise that God's grace is sufficient. And not only that, but that his power is made perfect in weakness. His power is made perfect in weakness. What an exquisitely creative God that we get to serve. He didn't leave us in the dust after the fall. He took the curse of sin and turned it around so that we, imperfect and unworthy creatures, could be made holy, set apart for his divine work. And I love Paul's response to this because he keeps writing. And he says, "So that Christ will be glorified, I will delight. I will respond joyfully. I will rejoice in the hardships, the persecutions, and my failures." And don't get me wrong, Paul wasn't perfect either, because before this, he writes to the church about how he pleaded with God to take it away from him, not once, but 3 times. The difference about Paul is that he had ears to hear when God spoke to him, to tell of his masterful provision, and eyes to see that provision work for his good, as well as for God's ultimate glory. And boy, was he excited to share it when he did. In the skit, the girl asked God to mold her into the image of Jesus and to take away things that didn't need to be there. She didn't realize the extent that the work was going to take, and she didn't anticipate the pain that she was going to feel during the process. Her heart was in the right place because she desired to be more like Jesus, but when the process started, she quickly became uncomfortable and tried to take control. You don't have to answer out loud, but does this sound familiar? Can you relate to her responses? I know I can. But the beautiful thing about grace is that it's okay that we answer yes. Because as God so wisely pointed out in the skit, it's a process. He doesn't expect us to get it right the first time. However, as we are shaped and molded into the masterpieces that we were always meant to be, we are called to respond to God's promise as Paul did, by opening our ears to hear, our eyes to see, and our hearts to trust in his perfect plan. Be comforted by the truth that our God is a God of provision. He works through infinite wisdom, always for our good, which is to conform us to Christ. Praise God for his magnificent and perfect work. Psalm 139:23 through 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me into the way everlasting.